Good morning, everyone. I'll just wait for another couple of people to filter in and we'll get going. Okay, well, we've given it 11:01, so we'll get started. Hello and welcome to the Flood Ready, the Future of Insurer Event Response webinar, hosted by Insurance Times in association with ICEYE. My name is Yanis Katoulis, Deputy Editor at Insurance Times, and today I'll be hosting an excellent panel of experts as we move through a discussion on how the UK insurance sector is continuing to develop in the face of increasing flood risks. Before I introduce the panel, however, just a few quick logistics notes. We are scheduled in for an hour, but we'll make sure to leave time at the end of the discussion so that we can answer audience questions. You should be able to see a Q&A function at the bottom of your screens, so if you were with us live today, then please do throw in some questions as you think of them, and we'll try to get to them, whether that's at the end or throughout the discussion. Also, if you do need to jump up or answer the door or pick up an urgent call, then please do not worry, as we will be posting a recording of the webinar very soon, as well as reporting on some of the key discussion topics. Our sponsors ICEYE will also be giving a very quick demo of the technology at the end of the session and what it can provide, so please do stay on if you're interested in seeing that. But with that out of the way, please allow me to introduce our panel for today. Joining us from Aviva, we have the insurer's Head of Personal Lines Home Claims, Laura Lazarus. Good morning, Laura.
Morning.
Morning. And also bringing insurer expertise on the issue of flood response, we have Zurich's Head of Large, Complex and Commercial Insurance Claims, Charlie Bush. Welcome, Charlie.
Morning, Yanis. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. And last, by no means least, our panel today is rounded out by ICEYE's Paul Sowden, who is the firm's Strategic Account Manager for the UK, Australasia and Africa. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, everybody. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming, Paul. So let's jump into the topic. Flood risk. It's been rising across the UK, 6.3 million properties exposed, and with that number projected to reach 8 million by 2050. Just last year in 2024, UK insurers paid out £585 million in weather-related claims following a record 12 named storms. And with that being passed and us into 2025, I just wanted to start off and warm us up with a question around what the industry has learned from that period, both in terms of potential new approaches and operational tactics. Would you like to kick us off with that, Laura? What's Aviva learned from the past few years?
Yeah, so I think our learnings over the past few years really is all about making sure that we understand how difficult these events can be for our customers. A flood event in particular is incredibly traumatic. Often there isn't a quick fix. So, our learning really is making sure that we centre our flood response around what our customers' needs are, how we can best support them, how we can get to them quickly, how we can do the things that matter to them most really quickly, emergency payments and alternative accommodation, etc. And I guess, just making sure that our processes and our tools and our systems all kind of help us to kind of get behind that ultimate aim of being able to be there quickly when customers need us. So I think, in terms of what we've learned, they're probably the key things. I don't think we necessarily, it was a learning that that speed and the ability to show up for our customers, we've always known that, but I think we've learned better and smarter ways of doing that over the years.
Absolutely. I think, that speed point is absolutely crucial. Is that something you would echo, Charlie?
I would echo all of what Laura said, and I suspect that there might be quite a lot of agreement between us, despite working for competitors, in as much as that we're both insurers that have an outstanding reputation of being able to respond in events like this. So I would, rather than repeating what Laura said, probably just add a couple of other comments. The first one is this speed point. So the last couple of days, I was actually in Manchester and spent quite a lot of time with 4 of our key brokers, and they really emphasised this point around speed of both policy acceptance and then payments. It really is critical, and especially not just in the personal line space where it's somebody's home, their most precious asset beyond their family, but particularly in that small, medium-sized business space where ensuring that they've got financial liquidity as quickly as they can to keep their businesses afloat is essential. But aside from that, I think what we've probably also learned over the years, and again, not just Zurich, but most other insurers and particularly people that just pay an interest in this topic, is just the increasingly unpredictable nature of flooding events. There used to be a fairly traditional pattern as to when you would expect bad weather and flood. But some of the worst floods we've seen are where the ground is particularly dry during the summer and you have a severe flash flood. And also in urban areas where obviously there's a much higher percentage of concrete and pavements. I suppose, flooding is a relatively localized event. So I think one of the challenges around how you spread your resources most effectively, I think we'll probably get into that a little bit later. And I suppose the only other point to make is that despite comments of certain world leaders in the past couple of days, the reality is that this is connected to climate change, almost undoubtedly, and it's only going to get worse. And therefore, the more we can learn through these events and the more we can be prepared for them, so much the better. And I will just talk a bit later about, how we perhaps run scenarios a bit like what they do in Japan around testing for, their earthquake resilience, so that people actually know what to do in the event of a flood. But I'll leave it there for the moment, Yannis.
No, excellent. Those are really, really good points, actually. And Paul, I mean, I know you bring a slightly different perspective, but kind of working in the same sector. What would you like to add on the kind of recent learnings around flood response, particularly in the UK?
One of the great things about working for a vendor is you get to talk to various voices across the country. So we've probably spoken to most of the major insurers over the past sort of 18 months, 2 years. And a lot of them would echo everything that Laura and Charles have said. I think the thing that's really struck me over the last sort of 2 years is whilst we've had a lot of losses, they have been broadly manageable for the market. We've not seen any sort of super losses, events that have really challenged the market in terms of resourcing or of kind of loss. Basically, no one is really struggling and reporting bad figures because of a flood. But what we definitely see is that this sort of increase over the last sort of couple of years has just focused minds a little bit that the big one is going to come. We've been lucky, but at some point in the next few months, few years, we are going to get another Cumbria flood or something kind of significant. And companies have to be ready to respond because it is going to push them, and they need to make sure that the solutions that they were delivering sort of 5, 6, 10 years ago, are fit for purpose.
Absolutely. And I think that really focuses minds on what we're discussing today, which is making sure that we are prepared for those events. And look, to really get into the discussion, I mean, one of the themes of the webinar as we're talking today is that event situational awareness and how insurers and their partners can be aware of these floods both before they happen, what's happening during and after as well. So I wanted to ask, maybe you could start on this one, Laura. What Aviva do in terms of early event awareness and throughout and after events, and what kind of technologies you use to make sure that you're able to know what's going on the ground?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, pre-event, we work closely with our weather forecasters. We've got some of our own kind of data and flood mapping that we use, and we'll use our media teams and our social media teams to arrange things like customer mail shots. We can do targeted SMSs or kind of email warnings and posts to help customers be prepared. When we know flooding has occurred or is extremely likely to occur, again, using some of our analytics tools, we will proactively reach out to customers and kind of offer support or give them pre-claims advice where necessary. I think we're also really focused at Aviva on helping to kind of educate customers. So we've got a flood advice leaflet and an extreme weather hub that we've built on our website, which are all aimed at supporting customers to be better prepared for flooding, both in terms of the actual event itself and any kind of readiness activity that they may wish to undertake, but also just in terms of the claims process and understanding that. And I think, probably similar to what Charles mentioned, as part of our Future Communities campaign, we're really focused on raising awareness of the challenges faced by customers and homeowners and businesses in kind of preparing for those future climate risks. So I think it's just really working on, utilising the data that we've got, the information from our weather forecasters, and just trying to use all available sort of media channels and communication channels to proactively share that information with customers ahead of the event, so that they can take relevant steps to prepare, and all of that, helps us align our resource to the right areas, and it enables us to be there on the ground in the right place at the right time, back to that crucial point on speed.
Yeah, I think that at the right place at the right time is such a vital thing, especially in flood response, where the picture can change so quickly on the day. I feel like I'm repeating myself, Charlie, but is that something you would echo as well? Is that largely similar? And what would you add on that event situation?
No, it's very similar. I will add some additional points, because I think what Laura's picked up on is really interesting. So the first thing is, actually, for the first time ever, I think, I don't know if anybody else has heard this on the call, but I heard a radio advert that has clearly been put out by the government. I think it was on Radio 2 or something earlier this week or last week, as I was driving, talking about what to do in the event of a flood. And it was giving safety advice, and it was talking about it. The advert was probably 30 seconds. I've actually tried to find it on the internet and haven't been able to do so. But it was after you had asked me to contribute to this webinar, so I was particularly interested in it. And it talked about making sure that you had emergency provisions, but also importantly, your insurance documents close to hand, so that if there was a flood warning, you would have the kind of emergency things that you needed. So I found that very interesting. And we know that this is of real interest to the government around making sure that people are prepared for flooding. So that's the first thing I've mentioned. We similarly do mail shots out to customers where we believe that they're in flood susceptible areas, with knowing that there's a weather event coming. So we'll be able to reach those customers, ahead of time. And in those mail shots, we explain to customers that it's really helpful if they were to take their their personal possessions, or the things which are important to them, to the first floor of their property. And we talk to them about, or we help them understand how they might be able to minimize the damage, or potentially be able to even prevent the damage that a flood may bring about. But I was talking to somebody that represents the borough of Hackney in London, probably about 3 or 4 months ago. And I said, "Oh, it's fantastic, we're doing this great stuff." And he said, "Yeah, but the problem that I've got is that in my borough in Hackney, which is particularly susceptible to flooding, is that English is only the first language of a very small proportion of our residents. So how are you reaching the people that speak 20 other mother tongue languages, whether that's Pakistani or Brazilian or Portuguese or whatever it is?" And that really got me thinking around whether or not we're actually able to really target the people who are in the most susceptible areas, and who are potentially some of the most vulnerable people. And so in Zurich, we're now looking at that, and how we use artificial intelligence as a way of being able to potentially very quickly adapt somebody's voice to being in a foreign language, so that you can then reach potential customers in some of those areas where English isn't their first language. The other topic that's of interest that I hadn't appreciated either is that there is no census data around the number of basements in the UK. And as everybody will be aware, when you run out of space to be able to go up, or cities run out of space generally, then people go down. And without that level of knowledge, it's very difficult to, again, make sure that we're targeting the right people. So another area, I think, where insurers can just really help support customers in a more specific way, perhaps, is just understanding some of these nuances around, who lives in basement flats. How can we support those individuals? How do they know what to do in the event that there is a flood in their local area? And then I suppose the final thing is just around what we can do to help prevent customers from suffering losses. So, you talked about what we do before a loss. I think between Laura and I, we probably explained that there's a lot that insurers can do to raise awareness around, imminent flooding. But after a loss, we're also having conversations with customers to say, look, actually, the fact that you've been flooded once will likely mean that there's a good chance you'll be flooded again. So what can we do to prevent that from happening as part of the reinstatement process of your claim? And we've got some really good examples. I'd love for there to be more if we were to have this conversation in another year, albeit sadly that will mean that there's probably been another flood. But for instance, we had an insured who had a basement property. They suffered a severe flood in a flash flood in July 2023, I think it was. And we said to them, look, as opposed to putting back in an expensive kitchen into your home, why don't we put in a less expensive kitchen and use some of the indemnity that you're also perfectly entitled to as a way of giving you a flood resilient front door. And the customer said to us afterwards, they said, I cannot believe that that's how insurers want to look at putting me back into the position I was in before. I will forever be a customer of Zurich's. This is such a fantastic way of you helping me. And not only have we created ourselves a better risk as an insurer, but much more importantly than that, we've created the customer a more resilient home, which will mean that their lives aren't turned upside down when there is another flood.
Yeah, I think those points around the localized nature of flooding and then the specific types of locale that insurers need to respond to. I think that point about basements is really interesting as well. And I think it's something that you can comment on, Paul, quite aptly, because you work across different territories. And what are some of the challenges the UK faces specifically?
I think one of the things that's really surprised me as we've engaged with insurers over recent years in the UK is actually how often people are surprised by flooding. We kind of have this view that the UK is a relatively small country. The Met Office is fantastic. The Environment Agency is regularly putting out some sort of flood alerts, but still insurers get caught out actually by flooding. And often not, they know that flooding is going to occur, but really being able to understand where in the UK flooding is happening is a real challenge. And one of our kind of partners actually describes sort of managing flood in the UK as a little bit like whack-a-mole. Because if you go to the US, you go to Australia, you go to even some of the countries in Europe, they are very large, open areas that often sort of flood. We've mapped floods in Australia that cover hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. It's kind of incredible. And when you come to the UK, with this island of valleys and our flooding is, as Charles has said, very localized, but on a big event, that is hundreds of localized events that are happening at once, and actually helping insurers to understand where that flooding has occurred is a real challenge. It really is a little bit of a case of kind of like whack-a-mole, because you think you've got flooded in one space and then it pops up in another and another and another. So actually, one of the big challenges I think all insurers really do struggle with is really understanding what is happening on the ground. Because at the moment, most insurers are largely dependent upon media reports, a little bit of meteorology. And let's be honest, it's when the claims are reported that they know that they've got some flooding in an area. And it's often only when they have a certain number of claims come in that they're able to kind of start saying, okay, this is where we need to prioritize and get people on the ground. And to kind of echo what Laura and Charles have said, speed matters. Get into people's homes, getting them the help they need. It is a matter of hours sometimes, not a matter of days and weeks. And that's really the big challenge that people are grappling with. And the technology does now exist to help improve that situational awareness, to kind of take you from days to kind of hours.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that operational challenge, and as you say, making sure that speed is of the essence in responding to these claims, is one of those challenges that insurers are facing into. Absolutely. And one of the outcomes of that is that often there are challenges around the allocation of expertise and the deployment of staff and claims professionals that need to be in the right places at the right times, to use your phrase there, Laura. How can employing some of these new technologies like high frequency satellite monitoring, for example, help to detect flood onset very quickly and allow us to get people into the right places at the right times. Charlie, did you want to start us on that one? I mean, how do you make sure that the allocation of expertise is done properly?
So we have a team up in Glasgow who have, the ability to be able to triage cases very quickly. As I said, what we're also able to do, and it's the slightly down the line opposite of reaching customers to warn them of floods. We know who are in flood affected areas, and we can actually proactively reach out to those customers, and particularly vulnerable customers, to understand if they've been affected. For me, this again raises a number of challenges which the industry has to grapple with around how you implement technology, how we work with what we know is an imminent retirement challenge within our loss adjusting communities, particularly on some of those larger losses. We talk in Zurich a lot about augmenting people with digital solutions. I don't think it's about one or the other. I think it's about combining the best of both so that we can use satellite imagery, we can use digital tools, that may be drone footage, for instance, which can very quickly establish what areas have been affected, and we can then accurately map over the top of that which properties are Zurich's insured businesses and how we can access those customers. But as I say, I think we need to, as an industry, I think we need to work as effectively as we can together to know how best it is to get those two things to perhaps gel. One of the other things I probably would just mention is that within Zurich, we have a kind of an engineering function, for want of a better word. So Zurich Resilience Solutions, a risk engineering area of our business, they're very actively engaged in this around, again, the real focus being on how we help customers prevent themselves from suffering these losses. But that's a relatively expensive solution, and one which is perhaps more accessible to our commercial customers. So we're now piloting, working with a startup business around being able to do desktop reviews of customers and where they're located and whether they're in potentially flood susceptible areas. And the advantage of that is that they give risk advice to those customers, but at a far reduced rate because of the desktop nature of the work that they do, which means that we're now able to access many more customers in helping them. To Paul's point, it's this, people are surprised by flood. I mean, we shouldn't really be surprised by flood anymore. And again, perhaps often insurers take it for granted slightly that we have a knowledge because of the nature of the work that we do around these topics. But we want to be able to reach as many customers as we can to be able to help them understand the risks that they face, how they can either prevent or mitigate those losses or get their businesses or their homes back up and running as quickly as we can. But just to kind of go back to the question more specifically, I think for me, it is about augmenting claims professionals with that technology to be able to go back to what I said at the very start about enabling them to assess damage and then settle claims as quickly as we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that point about resilience that you made in your response to your last question as well is really important. And we've actually got an audience question that I'll just throw into you at the moment, Charlie, which is about the point where you mentioned the example of the kitchen, where you provided a slightly less expensive kitchen in the reinstatement and then provided some resilience measures as well. We've got a question from Takis Ballis, good Greek name, asking, is that not a problem when indemnifying the insured, as this could be considered as betterment? Yeah, how does that interact with the problem of resilience?
Yeah, so I certainly don't see it as betterment at all. The insured is being paid out the same as what they're being paid out. For me, if perhaps as opposed to calling it betterment, this is about making commercial decisions which are right for our customers. It isn't in anybody's interest, and of course, least of all ours and the customers, for them to suffer a loss again. These are hugely disruptive events. I'll talk a little bit later about how we support customers with recognizing that this causes severe mental anxiety and some of the work that we've done around that a little bit later on. There are typically three ways in which a customer can look at how they build in resilience into their business, as I see it. So the first is exactly as I've just described. So where the policyholder, as it so happens, and again, it's a little bit back to my point about, the Hackney case, is I'm going to use a high net worth example, but that doesn't represent society at large. So there would be a challenge as to say, well, how do you apply that to somebody that's got, a standard home insurance policy? But in that instance, they had a £200,000 kitchen.
Yeah.
And as I said, we gave them a less expensive but still extremely nice kitchen, and used the additional money to be able to make their home more resilient. So in addition to just putting in a flood resilient door, we also we put the plasterboard back in horizontally as opposed to vertically, which is how it's traditionally put into buildings, so that in the event that water was to get into their home, and incidentally, there's a difference between flood resilience and flood resistance. Flood resilience is much easier to manage. It's where you accept that an element of water may ingress into a property, whereas flood resistance is where no water will come into a property. There is an enormous price differential between making a home impermeable to water versus accepting that some water will come in, but it makes the home much quicker to be able to reinstate. So as I said, we put plasterboard in horizontally, we lifted the plug sockets higher up the wall, so that in the event that water did come into the property, there would have been a lot less of it, but you could get that person's home back up and running much, much quicker with far less disruption. The second way in which you can approach this is through policy amendment. So in certain policies, more in the commercial space, there are public authority clauses where it is expected of insurers that they will put in place things which are more sustainable. And Scotland is a good example where with reinstating old heating systems with air source heat pumps, by way of example. And then the third area where we've actually seen some success, maybe surprisingly to some people on the call, is where policyholders have said, actually, I will contribute some of my own money to making my home or my business more resilient, recognizing that there's an opportunity there to share costs. And if they're already going through an amount of upheaval in the reinstatement process as a result of the insurance claim, they see an opportunity to invest some of their own money in actually making their home better for the future, or their business better for the future. But I suppose I don't see it as betterment. There is a challenge around people saying, well, surely it's more expensive if you do this. And I think I've just given three very good examples as to where it's not necessarily more expensive, but it's absolutely the right thing to do. And I've no doubt that other insurers will be following our lead in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the question of resilience to flood is one we can maybe talk about slightly later on in the discussion, but it is absolutely vital to how, as at a macro level, I think the insurance industry responds to the increasing level of flood in the UK and the risks that it provides. But to get back to the discussion where we were going, Laura, how does Aviva respond to these challenges of making sure that operational expertise and claims functions are in the places they need to be?
Yeah, so we rely on early warnings of weather events from our weather partners, and I mentioned before we've got some flood mapping technology and data that allows us to plan our response quickly. What we've got an in-house team of adjusters at Aviva, and actually having the tools and the mapping technology coupled with our own in-house adjusting team enables us to kind of look at where we think customers are going to be impacted the most and deploy our teams accordingly. Like we've said, continually speed is really of the essence here. So we're looking at the future of AI and Gen AI tools as they evolve, and kind of focusing on actually how do we get the claims more quickly out to our adjusting teams in those scenarios. So how can we pull in additional data sources, additional mapping technology, all to make sure that that when we've got our people ready to go, we're deploying them quickly to the right places. And I think the build on that for us is work that we're doing, not just to make sure that we get the claim to the right place quickly in the first instance, but using analytics and technology to understand when claims aren't progressing as we would expect them to. So
Right.
actually, we've got our people to the right place. We've helped that customer initially, but actually making sure that that drying regime is developing as we'd expect. The property is drying as we would intend, and we're using technology to allow us to be able to spot those claims and intervene much earlier on, which all kind of focuses on us being able to get customers back to normal more quickly. So I think, as technology evolves, we'll be able to spot all of that much more quickly, ultimately, making sure that we're proactively supporting customers through that journey and spotting when things could be going quicker for them too.
Absolutely. I think that it's all about planning, as you say, and making sure you have the right information.
Yeah, there's often, I mean, routing, we chatted before, getting a claim to an expert quickly is incredibly important, but that's almost, we've described that as getting the claim on the happy path. Once it's on the happy path, it's really, it's equally as crucial that you keep it there and kind of keep that proactive focus through the journey, particularly on flood claims, which we know can be quite long tail and really quite impactful for customers. So it's making sure you've got the right balance of the initial notification and all of those immediate actions, and then all of the great actions that you need to keep taking throughout that claim.
Yeah, I do not envy your operational difficulties.
Yeah, and that's where the technology is going to be great, right? Because it's going to help us spot that stuff much sooner, and just enable that all to be much slicker as it evolves.
Absolutely. But Paul, what would you like to add to this discussion? I know that when we were speaking before the webinar, you talked about this problem of claims kind of snowballing if they're not dealt with quickly as well.
This really builds upon what Laura said, where if you can get that client, that policyholder, onto the happy path early, you've got a pretty good chance of a positive outcome and a good customer experience. The challenge when you have these big kind of flood and catastrophe events is, I can't remember if it was Laura or Charles said this, we've a decreasing number of experienced staff that's often internal and sort of external, particularly amongst the loss adjusting kind of community. So everybody's scrambling for the same sort of limited resource. Everybody wants the most experienced loss adjusters. And so suddenly, instead of going from having a loss adjuster come out within sort of 24 to 48 hours, you can have situations where it can be, several days, if not several weeks before somebody sees their loss adjuster. And suddenly that kind of happy path is a very unhappy one, because the person, hasn't had any kind of progress. They're out of their home. They're probably having some kind of contact with their insurer. But to make it worse, their neighbor, who may be with the same company, may be having an entirely different kind of experience. And this is something we hear a lot of insurers talk about, is actually the challenge of kind of consistency, because you can have two people have very different experiences purely through luck, and not because it was bad intentions from the insurer. It's just they're trying to deal with such a volume of claims. And as Laura's articulated, the technology is increasingly there to enable insurers to be much more sophisticated in how they go about it. Also, one of the things we talk about a lot with customers kind of across the globe is the importance sometimes of going slow to go fast. Right. Processes are often, someone makes a claim, a loss adjuster is appointed, right? But their neighbor reports the claim 2 seconds later, they get an entirely different sort of loss adjuster. And so that's not efficient use of resource for the loss adjuster. It's not efficient for the insurer. So there's a lot of ways that now technology can help insurers get that more kind of complete picture of what's going on and take a more sophisticated approach to how they manage these events. How do you cluster loss adjusters? How do you cluster contractors? How do you identify which is the most significantly impacted set of properties, and perhaps get them onto a different path because they're going to need more complex treatment? You're going to need to put people into medium-term accommodation rather than short-term accommodation. How do you make sure you're getting that accommodation close to workplaces and schools? All of these things not just improve the customer experience, but they also ultimately reduce the quantum of the claim. Because the faster you get that person back in the house, typically the cheaper that is going to be for you.
Absolutely, incredibly complex exercise. And I know one thing you mentioned there was the problem of making sure that there are enough loss adjusters. And I mean, in the short term, that's complex. In the long term, you know, we are facing into a bit of a talent shortage with that sort of role. And I know that's something that both Laura and Charlie, you both mentioned when we were speaking before the webinar as well. How can we kind of face into that, Charlie? What do you think of that issue?
Yeah, so we our teams handle our claims. So I think there is absolutely a kind of time spent on the job. I don't know if that sounds almost too simplistic, but actually talent of individuals that are capable of doing these claims is obviously vitally important, but equally so is experience. I'm sure Laura will recognize that, similarly, the people in her teams that, are most effective at managing customers through really difficult claim scenarios are those that have had experience of doing it in the past. And I don't think there's a substitute for experience personally. That's also where I think, as I mentioned a moment ago, there is that challenge around how do you augment people with technology such that you still have that level of experience. From a major loss perspective, we have our teams visiting customers, going to site. Those individuals come back into our teams and they spend a lot of time training up our individuals who are in some of our more fast flow claims areas to help them understand what customers' expectations are around how to manage claims in these sorts of situations. Speaking to customers is vitally important. At Zurich, we've now given our customers many more ways to access us. So, for instance, live chat, so WhatsApp chats with us as a way of being able to reach a different generation that don't want to pick up the telephone, actually just want a really quick response. So similarly, there is also a need for us to make sure that that experience which we're growing is one which is adapting readily to the expectations of our customers that are a changing demographic over time. As I said, we spend a lot of time training our teams to ensure that they understand how our policies respond, understanding, for instance, I was going to touch on it earlier, but when it comes to alternative accommodation, as Paul's referenced, actually, how are we most effectively managing that? Bringing real life examples to the fore so that people understand that actually it may not be putting somebody in a hotel for 6 months on a long-term contract is necessarily the right thing when their support network is nearby to where their home was. The kids' schools may be nearby. They may rely on medical expertise. So we've started recently making more of a concerted effort to ensure that we're using pods where we can to make sure that people can stay in their homes if that's what their preference is. We've had examples where we've actually put a caravan on somebody's driveway because their preference from a medical perspective was that they absolutely needed to be nearby to where their home was. This all comes from experience, from bringing to life creative ways of addressing problems and making sure that we're sharing those examples with our teams of people that are handling claims on a day-to-day basis. There's also loads of learnings from other perils as well. So this isn't just about learning from flood specifically, but actually just understanding customers' expectations from fire or escape of water. There are some similarities between some of these cases as well, and making sure that we have this virtuous circle of learning within our business, and actually not just within our business, across the industry. I know that there are colleagues of mine on this call now who will be listening to not only what I say, but also hearing from Laura and Paul around some of the experiences within other organizations to make sure that we're bringing back the best of what these other businesses do to our own organizations to create an industry which is fit for purpose and where our reputation becomes one of, I've got an insurance policy and it does exactly what I want it to do, as opposed to I bought an insurance policy and now I'm worried about whether or not it's actually going to respond to the issue that I've unfortunately suffered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that industry collaboration point is something that's vital, especially with kind of not national, but quite large scale events like floods can be. It's not just one insurer responding, it's kind of the industry as a whole. And what would you like to add on that point, Laura? I mean, both on the point of developing talent, but also of anything that Charlie raised.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the developing talent point, because we do have our own team of field adjusters, making sure that we're building capability in that space is really important to us. So we've got some graduate adjusters joined us only just recently, and we've got various kind of future career schemes that we run internally to make sure that we're bringing through a pipeline of that adjuster talent. But to Charles's point, there's not a magic wand you can wave. It takes time to build that. So we're really investing in making sure that we give people the time and space to grow and start to build some resilience in that space. So I think that's definitely a key area of focus for us. I think that taking learnings from other perils, I think we're constantly reviewing what we do, and there are similarities and kind of read across there. And I think particularly on some of the wet perils where you're reliant on specialist suppliers, etc., to support. I think that's another point where I think Paul touched on this. As data evolves, being able to cluster claims and kind of work a bit smarter where we are reliant on specialist suppliers or specialist resource, I think is all going to be incredibly helpful in terms of helping us all respond and helping the kind of suppliers as well to manage their resource and their capacity so that they're better set up to support all of the customers across the market that they're needed to support. Is probably the bits I would add.
Absolutely. And Paul, I mean, as a supplier yourself, you're not quite in the same position as the loss adjusters, but what do you learn from your interactions with them on this issue of capacity and direction?
I'm not going to say I feel sorry for the loss adjuster community. That we're about to be going a bit too far. But when we kind of have conversations with them, they understand the challenges, and they often do feel that they are put in the middle, and that they are wanting to be more effective. They are wanting to kind of collaborate, but for understandable reasons of kind of competition. We're not able as a market to work together. It would be lovely if Aviva, Zurich, and whoever else could say, okay, we're only going to use loss adjuster A to look after all claims in this street, right? So they could just send one loss adjuster who can look after, but for obvious reasons that they can't do that. But I'm with everything that Charles and Laura have said here. Technology is a great enabler. I've seen from my work with customers across the globe just what a difference technology kind of can make. But ultimately, claims is a people business. When you have a catastrophic, life-changing event like your house being flooded, you want somebody that you can speak to, who can understand your challenges and support you through that kind of process. Technology can aid, but we need to continue to invest in our people, and that's the insurers, that's the loss adjusters, and that's everybody else in the value chain, to make sure we continue to deliver for what is going to be an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we, as you said, I can't remember who said it now, but waving a magic wand would really be helpful if we could, but I think it's going to require quite a lot of effort from the industry to get there. I mean, just before we go into the Q&A, there was one last question that I wanted to ask about the obviously we've talked about the challenges of making sure that capacity is in the right places at the right times, and making sure that we know what's going on as the insurance industry when we're responding into these flood events. But with the utilization of that data, how important is it in terms of speed? And I know that's a theme that's come up in the discussion today quite a lot, to make sure that we are improving our FNOL processes and making sure that reinstatement or restitution is happening quickly as well. Because as we say, that we talked about the snowballing, compounding negative impacts of claims not being addressed quickly, but how can we make sure that they are addressed quickly as well with those FNOL processes, for example? Did you want to answer that one, Laura, first?
Yeah, sure. So I think without completely labouring the speed is critical point. I think the more information we can gather at the first notification point, the more chance we've got of routing that claim to the right expert first time, and that's really important in terms of giving that customer the support, the consistency, and the continuity. So we today we use a series of triggers. So we've got some manual triggers. We spend lots of time in the summer months, giving our frontline teams training on weather perils and how to deal with them and what to spot. So we've got lots of manual triggers, but we do also have some analytics and some automation that helps us to identify complex claims quickly, and make sure that we're routing them to the right area within our adjusting teams. And like I mentioned earlier, we focus on making sure that we quickly get that claim to the right person. Ideally with as little triage as possible. What we don't want is a claim to go into one team to then have an element of triage to be passed to another team. We want to try and get as much information as we can at notification to get that claim to the person who is going to be able to do what the customer needs them to do quickly. And I think, as we've said, as technology and tools evolve, the ability for us to get more of that information and use analytics to kind of direct and steer where the most likely suitable home for that claim is going to be quickly, is going to help us, with all of the other stuff we spoke about, it's going to help us get the information from the customer, give them some reassurance, get somebody out to them quickly to start that all important kind of mitigation activity, and provide the other support that they need in terms of things like emergency payments, alternative accommodation, and all of that. So, I think that initial notification is absolutely crucial, and having the right tools and data at that point is really important. And I think, like Paul says, the tools will do part of it. We also need to make sure we've got the right skilled people that are going to spot things and be able to make sure that we get that claim on the right path from the start.
Perfect. Okay. And I think that mention of technology is super important there as well. And Charlie, I know that's something that you were talking to me about when we were talking about this FNL point before the call, the importance of being able to ingest that information properly and utilize it properly. What would you add on that question?
To be completely honest, Yanis, I probably wouldn't add a great deal to what Laura said. I mean, Laura was talking about claims going on the happy path. A colleague of mine years ago talked about full fat ethanol, making sure exactly to this point you get as much information as you possibly can at ethanol. That we also try and use as much publicly available information and reuse information which a policyholder has already told us as part of when they took out the policy, so as we're not having to duplicate requests for information, which is time consuming and not necessarily adding any value to that customer's journey. The only point I would add in terms of one of the things which I think that Zurich are doing, which has been so successful, and it's connected to ethanol incidentally, is what we're doing with Zurich Support Solutions. So as I said earlier in the conversation, we recognize that somebody having a flood at their home can be an enormously emotional time, and the Zurich Support Solutions offering is an entirely independent free service which we give to all of our customers, where they can contact a number to seek help in terms of the mental support that they may need. It's not just for them directly, it extends to their families as well. And we've seen an enormous uptake with the number of customers, particularly following flooding incidents, engaging with that service and finding real value in it. I'll mention one other point whilst you've given me the microphone, which is just around supply chain. And it goes to this point about, there is no substitute for communicating with customers clearly and in a timely fashion. And again, it goes back to different customers wanting to communicate with insurers in a different way. We have self-serve portals where a customer can see where their claim is on that journey. But again, there has been an awful lot of challenge in the supply chain network, not just with suppliers. So drying suppliers, for instance, are not as readily available, I suspect, as many insurers would like them to be. But in addition to that, when it comes to having to reinstate a property which has been severely damaged from a flood peril, a lot of that material has also been caught up as, various different geopolitical situations have played out. And it may mean that actually it's not as quick for insurers to be able to get a particular type of plasterboard or paint as it has been in the past. And again, we just need to be making sure that we're communicating with customers as quickly as possible to explain to them why we haven't been able to put their house back to the way it was, 2 weeks after the event, as opposed to a couple of months. And I think one of the challenges, and again, this came up in the conversation with our brokers earlier this week, was just around very few customers in a serious event want to take a cash settlement. They want their insurer by their side to help them reinstate their home. And I understand that absolutely. It's hugely emotive. It's very different to, vehicle damage. And so again, it is essential that we are empathetic towards our customers, communicating with them really clearly and proactively throughout these cases, to make sure that they understand where they are at all times, and engaging in that conversation around, resilient reinstatement, and actually whether we can do things perhaps differently or more creatively, as I talked about earlier, to help them in the longer term as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we want to jump into Q&A, but did you have anything to add on that point of FNOL, Paul, and what perhaps ICEYE can provide with the extra data that insurers rely on as well?
I just had one quick point, and this actually comes from one of Charles's colleagues that I was speaking to last year, who said one of the challenges at FNOL is you are dealing with people. And he kind of gave the example, if you can have someone who's got 5 centimeters of water in their living room, and on the phone they make it sound as if there's 5 meters of water, it's a disaster, everything is destroyed, and they need full help. On the other hand, you can have someone, I have this image of a little old lady who's up in her loft, all of her furniture has flowed down the road in the water. And she's there like, there's a little bit of damp in my house. I'm sure other people are worse off than me. Now, they're very different ends of the extreme, but because of the way they've communicated, you do need, again, to have that sort of experienced person sometimes to be able to pick that up. And if you can augment at the FNOL stage, the call handlers sort of knowledge, like being able to identify that, the floodwaters in the first case are relatively shallow, and in the second case are very extreme. They can ask more sophisticated questions, or the appropriate questions, and they can get to the right level of answer, rather than just relying upon the person at the on the other side having a knowledge and trust in them.
Absolutely, that objective data is so vital in situations like this, as you say. And I think I'm the sort of person that would maybe downplay the seriousness of things, and that's not exactly helpful for insurers. Let's get into Q&A. Exactly. We've got quite a lot of questions, so I don't know if we'll be able to get to them all, but I'll pick out some of the more pertinent ones as well. And we've got one from Hannah Rice, who says that customers who have never been affected by flooding potentially need a mindset shift. Do we have any advice on how to shift public perception from "it's never happened to me, so it won't" to a more proactive mindset of "it could happen, so I need to be prepared"? And I know that speaks to some of the resilience point we were talking about, Charlie, but how would you respond to that?
Well, I think it's really, again, I've never heard the advert from the government as I said, on the radio, just around raising awareness of flooding. Again, one of the things which I talk about a lot in Zurich is we have so much experience in our claims function, but if you look at a claims function in its traditional sense, only relatively few of your customers actually feel the experience of that. So what we're trying to do more of is taking our data and insight that we have and actually sharing it with our customers who have not suffered losses. Again, going back to this, people in your area have been flooded in the past. Here are some of the things working with either our Zurich Resilient Solutions team or just based on our examples. When we send out policy documents to all of our SME customers, in there is here are the top 5 most likely perils you will suffer, of which flood is one. And here are some of the simple things that you can do to mitigate against those losses having a seriously detrimental impact to your business. I think this is about constant communication, and a little bit to Laura's point earlier, a lot of training around flood takes place during the summer months. But the reality is now that actually flood is an all year round phenomenon, particularly with severe flash flooding, often in urban areas where it has the greatest impact. This is about equally raising awareness that this isn't just something which happens between November and February or March. This is something which can catch you out at any time, and you need to be aware of that, and also know what to do in the event of a flood, to the government advert about, having emergency provisions and your insurance documents to hand. And not just doing it in English as well, making sure that we're reaching our full customer base.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything to add on that, Laura or Paul?
I think the only thing I'd add is I think it's a really good question and a real challenge. I mentioned earlier we've got our Building Future Communities campaign, which is really focused on raising awareness of challenges faced by homeowners, and also just really trying to work closely with our media teams and social media teams on those really proactive comms, trying to bring it to life for people. What could happen, and via our Extreme Weather Hub, just trying to educate people on how to be prepared. It is definitely tricky, but I think like Charles says, there's more and more information out there, and I think we are entering more volatile times, but potentially from a weather perspective. So I think it's going to be increasingly on people's agendas, I think.
Yeah, well, that's both encouraging and worrying, I think, as a response. Yeah. Paul, anything to add on that question?
I think
No,
excellently
okay.
answered by both.
Okay, great. There's another one here that I think is really interesting as well, and we've spoken about speed quite a lot today. But one of the audience members, Vansh Nanda, has asked, how do insurers balance the need for quick payouts with the accuracy of loss assessments during large-scale flood events? And I think that's quite a pertinent question. Who would like to go on that? Laura?
I think I'll go, Charles, and then you can see if there's anything to add. I think we probably need to be clear about what we mean by quick payments, because I think when I talk about quick payments in a flood scenario, I think we're talking about kind of emergency payments. So being out there and making sure the customers have what they need day one, whether that be access to alternative accommodation or things that may have been been lost in the damage. So I think there's emergency payments that we will make. I think then we will try and act as quickly as we can to kind of settle that claim and conclude that claim with the customer. Getting the property dried and supporting on the reinstatement, etc. So where we will try and do that as quickly as possible. I think when we've spoken about the speedy payments throughout this, that's really those kind of initial emergency payments to make sure the customer has what they have what they need.
Yeah, I would agree with what Laura said, but I also think this is where digital solutions have a part to play enormously in being able to assess very quickly whether insurance policies provide cover for flood. I can see in some of the questions people suggesting that there are now blanket exclusions around flood. That's not something which Zurich do. But actually, with certain digital tools, we're able to assess very quickly what provisions our policies do provide cover for. And in turn, we're able to make payments much more quickly. It does go back, though, to the point I made earlier, which is many customers in a flood situation don't want cash. They want their home reinstated. And insurers will have the contracts with our loss adjusters and our building repair networks that they will pay directly. As I said, this is different to vehicle damage, where you can pay £2,000 and somebody takes their car to a local repair network and they can get it fixed for themselves. They want to take their own ownership of that case. Homes are very different. And so again, I agree with Laura's point around making sure that people have got what they need immediately, but actually it's not necessarily cash that people want quickly. They want their home reinstated by the insurers as fast as they can. And that goes a little bit to the points we've talked about earlier around supply chain challenges and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And was there anything to add from you on that one, Paul?
We actually do work with one insurer, not in the UK, who uses our data to make kind of automatic payments for flood, which is a very interesting kind of concept. But ultimately, I think when we're talking about speed, we are talking about less payments, and it's about getting people restitution and getting people back to where they used to be. You know, all of those little bits that Charles and Laura have talked about, that's ultimately the most important thing. Is it's the right decision and the right outcome at the appropriate pace. And I don't think insurers should ever do anything fast if it's going to result in an incorrect outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's vital. And there's loads more really interesting questions here, especially around resilience and the impact of the Build Back Better scheme. But I'm afraid we have run out of time. I know what I will say is I think that was an excellent discussion. And as I think an hour is way too short to cover exactly everything that we need to be facing into as the UK flood insurance sector. But I think that is an excellent overview of what we've learned and how we're facing into some of the better challenges. Thank you very much for attending. I know, and thank you very much to Laura and Charlie for contributing, and Paul as well. But Paul, I know that you wanted to do a very quick demo. So to the audience and to the judges, if they like, please do stay on if you are interested in seeing a very quick demo of ICEYE's capabilities as well. And if not, thank you very much for attending, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, Yanis.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah,
Thank
if you'd
you,
like to share your screen, Paul, we'll get started on that demo. I will get rid of my face from the screen as well.
Yanis, can you see what looks like the world on fire?
Not quite yet, no.
Okay.
Not on my screen or out the window.
It says, hang on, there we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, I can see that. Lovely. I'll mute myself.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending today's webinar. We hope you found it informative. ICEYE, we are a Finnish company, and we are a global leader in Earth observation. And we sponsored today's webinar because we are very much focused on resilience and helping insurers to respond to kind of natural catastrophes. We do this through unique capabilities that we present, and that is all really a result of the constellation that we operate. So we are the world's largest operator of synthetic aperture radar satellites. I'll go into that in a little more detail in a second. As of June, or as of September, actually, I should say now, we have launched 54 satellites, and across the globe, we have 45 insurance clients. These include Tokyo Marine, Swiss Re, Suncorp, Aon, QBE, and a host of other household names that most of you on the line will recognize. And we are recognized as being one of the most innovative companies in the sector, and particularly in the European market. We've actually just raised an additional $250 million of funding that will help us to kind of accelerate our technology, not just in launching of more satellites, but bringing new solutions to the various markets in which we operate, including insurance. A function of what we're able to do really is the size of our kind of constellations. And what I'm showing you here is the range of solutions that we have in the market. For the UK, we are predominantly focused around flood, but we are a global company. We operate in about 40 different markets across the globe, from the US through Europe, across Asia, into Australasia. And across those markets, we are covering flood, wildfire, wind, and going forward, earthquake, deforestation, persistent asset monitoring, and we're even going to be creating our own digital elevation models. And we're able to work on a global basis because we do have nearly 60 satellites in orbit. And this means that we can take an image anywhere on the planet approximately every 60 to 90 minutes. So for a very large event, such as a hurricane, we will often be taking somewhere between 300 and 500 different images. And those images form the foundation of what we provide to our insurance clients. People often say to us, kind of, how do you do what you do? And the number of satellites helps, but actually the core foundation is the satellites themselves, in that we have a unique range of technologies. So synthetic aperture radar is unique. It enables us to see through clouds, to see through smoke, to see through darkness, and where relevant, also through kind of wind, volcanic ash, and rain. So you have to imagine there's a storm coming through the United Kingdom. We all look out the sky right now, and most of us are probably seeing kind of clouds. That means optical imagery from satellites just doesn't work. You know, the storms come through, the rain is falling, there's significant floods, but an optical satellite is just going to be unable to see anything on the ground. Half of the day, in the peak season for flood that we're approaching, more than half of the day, the country is covered in darkness. So again, optical satellites, drones, planes, even if they can fly, they simply can't see what is happening on the ground. And as we talked about in the webinar, the nature of flood is often changing as well. We're seeing much more sort of fast moving flood events, flash floods, and that water can come and go in the space of sort of several hours. So if that happens under cloud, under darkness, the water's come and gone, the property's been impacted before you're able to get any other assets up and kind of take images. ICEYE satellites don't have to worry about that. Regardless of the conditions on the ground, we're able to see what is happening, when and where. And that unique capability means that regardless of the situation, regardless of where the flooding is, of the scale of the flood, the location of the flood, we are going to be able to capture it, and we're going to be able to produce those images. So what does that mean in terms of delivery to the market? So ICEYE's flood solutions is comprised of 3 components. The first is our flood early warning platform. When I joined, my assumption was that satellites were taking images all the time, everywhere. Turns out that wasn't quite correct. Actually, you have to task a satellite to take an image at a particular time in a particular place. So when it comes to flood, we need to know where in the world it's going to flood and when, so we can take the appropriate range of images at the right time. So we developed a model, a global model that predicts where flooding is going to occur and when. And actually, when we started to engage with the insurance market, what we saw was there was demand actually for additional information. I think most insurers are already accessing certain information in this area, such as the Environment Agency. But what we're able to do is provide an additional level of information on where flooding is going to occur, up to 96 hours out, and the potential severity. And that covers not just the UK, but every country around the globe. This doesn't rely upon our technology from the satellites, but is used by us to, as I say, task the satellites. And this is available as a platform. We're also looking to make it available as a plugin. We then actually come into what we provide as our kind of core deliverables. And so we have 2 solutions there. The first is what we call Flood Rapid Impact. This is a brand new solution that went live July this year. And what we're doing here is providing very rapid, within 8 to 12 hours of an event starting, we'll provide our first event. So when we talk about that situational awareness and the importance of understanding what is happening and where, this product is designed to help support it, insurers, brokers, and others with that information. Very rapidly, you can see where flood has occurred, and then get continual updates every 8 to 12 hours on its kind of progression. So as the flood moves into new areas, as it also starts to kind of retreat, you can get an understanding of that information and feed that into your surge response, to your operational processes, to your engagement with customers, and build out a much more rapid and effective flood response. Then we come to our final product, which is Flood Insights. So Flood Insights is our peak extent and depth solution. So once the flood has started to kind of peak, we start to produce this layer. And this layer is our view, an observed view of the maximum extent and depth of the flood. So as well as telling you here where the flood is, we're also going to give you some idea of the severity of that potential flood based upon its depth. So I used an example during the webinar of the old lady and the guy was 50 centimeters. This product helps you understand which communities, which streets, which neighborhoods have been most significantly impacted, and where that impact is less. So when you're looking to prioritize your response and determine which communities you place staff in, where perhaps you send loss adjusters first, this data is able to kind of help and guide you in that process. And then finally, just to show you some of the use cases that we kind of have. Across the top, you're seeing our 3 different products, so Flood Early Warning, Flood Rapid Impact, and Flood Insights, and the approximate sort of timelines and delivery that we produce mapped against an actual event. And then underneath, we have a number of different use cases for which our data and solutions are applied. No one insurer is currently doing all of these, but most insurers are working with us on several of these. So the core one is situational awareness, that understanding of the event and how it's unfolding. And that then feeds into a number of use cases that are relevant to different segments of the market. So one of the most popular ones is something that we talked about today. It's that loss adjuster and supplier management. How can you more effectively use and deploy your external and internal kind of resourcing? Clustering of resource to particular areas, especially those that are most impacted, making sure that you send the same loss adjuster to locations in the same street, in the same kind of postcode. And actually sometimes, rather than sending a loss adjuster first, identifying those most impacted properties and getting the contractors and the drying equipment out there. Because as we discussed today, the faster you're able to respond, the quicker you'll resolve that claim, but also more importantly, the cheaper that claim will be from an insurance kind of perspective. We also have another range of applications outside of the claims areas that we talked about, such as FNOL. These include event underwriting, kind of parametric, loss sizing, and also kind of communication with customers and clients that we support. Plus something that we sort of touched upon towards the end of the session, where we're talking about speed of response, is also making sure that you're managing leakage and fraud, because that does increase when you start to have a flood event. And just to show you how this information is visualized, what you're seeing here is an event that we captured from January 2025, and we've overlaid this with an imaginary portfolio, and we've put in place a hex grid. So using this type of information, an insurer is able to see where they have concentrations of exposure. Here, we're simply using a number of locations that could be impacted, but you could also feed in their information on the total sum insured, whether there have been claims received or not. You could have splits between motor, commercial, and household claims. And this is just giving you a very rapid view of what the event looks like, and information that helps you as a business respond more appropriately and more rapidly. If you'd like to find out more information about ICEYE and how we can support you, we'd be happy to have a conversation, and our contact details are available. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for your time today and for listening in.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was excellent, and we've still got quite a lot of interested people staying on for that, so I think they're very valuable as well. But with that, as Paul said, please do contact him if you're interested, and otherwise, thank you. Have a lovely rest of the day, and we hope you found the conversation interesting. Goodbye.